Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
Welcome to Policy and Rights, the show about government policy and human rights. Welcome back to Policy and Rights here on Depictions Media Radio. I am your host, Michael Clogs. And today we're going to hear from Albania. The Foreign Minister of Albania is going to make informal comments about the situation in between Russia and Ukraine with the war going on. She is going to talk about the chemical warfare and the military actions that happened in Bucha and other areas in Ukraine, and how Albania is willing to respond to what Russia is doing. Along with that, you heard that the Secretary General Antonio Guterres is in Ukraine and today, and there is going to be a press release coming out of all this soon, and we hope to get details on that so that we can report, of course, on what happened with the Secretary General to the UN's visit to the region and his discussion with Russian officials and, of course, Ukrainian officials to try to bring some sort of peace, or at least to get civilian casualties and people out of harm's way so that people can either leave the region voluntarily and go where it is that they want to go and not simply just be ensnared into the border across Russia. Along with that, Vladimir Putin has made warnings about that all of his objectives will be carried out by his military, and there is going to be a fuel embargo imposed by Gazprom, who is the Russian company delivering oil-based fuel products to Bulgaria and Poland. And there is going to be a discussion from another news agency about that. The DW News out of Europe, who are also going to discuss what the consequences could be to Poland and to other European countries with Russia threatening to cut off the fuel lines to Eastern Europe.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hold on, we'll just get started. Okay. The Secretary General was traveling this morning from Poland to Ukraine, and he has recently arrived in Kiev. Tomorrow, he will meet there with President Volodymyr Zelensky and Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba, and we expect him to speak to the press as well. Yesterday evening, upon his arrival in Rzeszów, Poland, on his way to Ukraine, the Secretary General was received by the President of Poland, Andrzej Duda. The Secretary General expressed his deep appreciation and gratitude to the President for the generosity of the Polish people, for the manner in which they opened their homes and their hearts to almost 2 million Ukrainian refugees. The Secretary General also briefed the President on his meetings in Moscow and Ankara. Yesterday afternoon, we also shared a readout of the Secretary General's meeting with President Vladimir Putin of the Russian Federation. During the tete-a-tete meeting, the Secretary General reiterated the United Nations position on Ukraine, and they discussed the proposals for humanitarian assistance and evacuation of civilians from conflict zones, namely in relation to the situation in Mariupol. The President agreed in principle to the involvement of the United Nations and the International Committee for the Red Cross in the evacuation of civilians from the Azovstal plant in Mariupol. Today, the Secretary General addressed in a video message the first meeting of his high-level expert group on net zero emission commitments of non-state entities. He told them that it is essential that we ensure the credibility and environmental integrity of net zero pledges. We need to ensure net zero commitments are ambitious and credible, and that they align with the highest standards of environmental integrity and transparency, he said. He also asked the group to work in an inclusive and open manner, adding that the best protection against any accusation of special interests will be the full transparency of the group's consultations and process. His full remarks are online. This morning, the Deputy Secretary General spoke at a meeting of the members of the Council of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Ms. Mohammed noted that the COVID-19 pandemic continues to violently derail progress made in achieving the 2030 Agenda, while more than 100 million additional people were pushed into extreme poverty in 2020, dramatically reversing a 2-decade-long decreasing trend. She said that slow progress towards gender equality has been pushed back, and now the war in Ukraine is having a severe impact on a world economy already battered by the pandemic and the triple planetary crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. To rescue the Sustainable Development Goals, the Deputy Secretary General said we will need to accelerate implementation on all fronts, including by massively scaling up financing. Although official development assistance rose to its highest level in 2021, it is not enough to make up for skyrocketing food and energy prices and debt servicing payments. Her full remarks have been shared with you. This morning, the Security Council heard a briefing by Huang Sha, the Special Envoy for the Great Lakes region. He told Council members that while past months have been characterized by encouraging dynamics of dialogue, cooperation, and by a willingness to address the root causes of instability in the region, the security and humanitarian crisis in eastern DRC has been aggravated by the resurgence of the armed group M23. It is also regrettable, he said, that the allied democratic forces and other armed groups continue to commit atrocities against civilians. Mr. Shah said that peace in eastern DRC remains extremely fragile. He called for increased security cooperation in the region. He also reiterated the importance of ensuring a direct and ongoing dialogue at the highest level between the leaders of the region. Finally, he called for continued support from the international community. His full remarks have been shared with you. Geert Peterson, the Special Envoy for Syria, briefed the Security Council yesterday afternoon. He told Council members that Syria is a hot conflict, not a frozen one. He said that the current strategic stalemate on the ground and Syria's absence from the headlines should not mislead anyone into thinking that the conflict needs less attention or fewer resources, or that a political solution is not urgent. Joyce Msuya, the Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, added that a staggering 4.1 million people in northwest Syria need humanitarian aid. Almost 1 million people are living in tents, half of which are beyond their normal lifespan, she said. She told the Council that the renewal of the UN cross-border authorization in July remains essential to save lives in northwest Syria. Those remarks are online. The UN mission in the Central African Republic reports that the government is currently hosting a week-long regional forum in Bangui to raise awareness and build digital media capacities to prevent conflicts related to hate speech in Central Africa. The forum is organized by the UN Regional Office for Central Africa, the Economic Commission of Central African States, with the support of the UN Peacekeeping Mission and other partners. Our humanitarian colleagues tell us that yesterday, donors pledged nearly $1.4 billion to respond to the drought in the Horn of Africa, the worst in the region in 4 decades, that has left more than 15 million people severely food insecure in Ethiopia, Kenya, and Somalia. These pledges, which will cover the next 6 months, were made at a high-level meeting in Geneva, co-hosted by the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs and the European Union's Civil Protection and Humanitarian Aid Operations. Senior representatives from the government of Ethiopia, Kenya, and Somalia also took part. Of the $1.4 billion pledged, some $1 billion will go towards immediate and life-saving aid, such as food, nutrition, water, and sanitation, cash and health assistance, as well as feed and medicines to keep livestock alive. The remaining pledges will go towards development support to the 3 drought-affected countries. The Emergency Relief Coordinator, Martin Griffith, said that once again, vulnerable people across the Horn of Africa are falling victim to the cruelty of acute hunger and potential famine in a crisis that is not of their own making. An estimated 2.8 million people, or nearly 40% of the population in the English-speaking Caribbean, is food insecure, which is 1 million more than in April 2020. That's according to the results of a recent survey conducted by the Caribbean Community and the World Food Programme. The survey says that severe food insecurity continues to increase in the region, with the current figure 72% higher when compared to April 2020. Highlighting the lasting impact of the pandemic, the results demonstrate deteriorating food consumption and diets, with 25% of respondents eating less preferred foods, 30% skipping meals or eating less than usual, and 5% going an entire day without eating in the week leading up to the survey. Today, we have 2 new resident coordinators to announce following their approval by the respective host governments. Khaled El Makwad of Egypt assumed the role of resident coordinator in Bahrain on April 16th, and in Guinea-Bissau, Anthony Ohemeng Boama of Ghana began leading our team on the ground on April 18th. Their full biographies are online. I want to flag that the Belarusian Association of Journalists has been named as the laureate of the 2022 UNESCO Guillermo Cano World Press Freedom Prize, following the recommendation of the International Jury of Media Professionals. Audrey Azoulay, Director General of UNESCO, noted that for 25 years, the UNESCO Guillermo Cano Prize has been calling the world's attention to the bravery of journalists around the world who sacrifice so much in the pursuit of truth and accountability. Once again, she said, we are inspired by their example and reminded of the importance of ensuring the rights of journalists everywhere to report freely and safely. The award ceremony will take place on the 2nd of May in Punta del Este, Uruguay, on the occasion of the World Press Freedom Day Global Conference, and it will be streamed online. A new report by our colleagues at the UN Convention to Combat Desertification says that up to 40% of the planet's land is degraded, threatening roughly half of the global GDP. That's $44 trillion. The report warns that if business as usual continues through 2050, there could be an additional degradation of an area almost the size of South America. The report also makes recommendations for decision makers on ways to invest in land restoration, climate change mitigation, and poverty reduction. The report is being released ahead of the 15th session of the Conference of Parties to the UN Convention to Combat Desertification, which will be held in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire, from the 9th to the 20th of May. You can find this report online. The World Health Organization and the UN Children's Fund today said that worldwide measles cases increased by 79% in the first 2 months of 2022 compared to the same period in 2021. WHO and UNICEF warned that this is a worrying sign of a heightened risk for the spread of vaccine-preventable diseases and could trigger larger outbreaks, particularly of measles affecting millions of children in 2022. The 2 UN agencies noted that pandemic-related disruptions, increasing inequalities in access to vaccines, and the diversion of resources from routine immunization are leaving too many children without protection against measles and other vaccine-preventable diseases. As of April 2022, the agencies report 21 large and disruptive measles outbreaks around the world in the last 12 months. Most of the measles cases were reported in Africa and the Eastern Mediterranean region. WHO and UNICEF noted that the figures are likely higher as the COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted surveillance systems globally with potential underreporting. And I have a response to some of the questions you've been making about the sentencing of Aung San Suu Kyi in Myanmar. The United Nations reiterates the Secretary General's condemnation of the military takeover on the 1st of February 2021 and repeats the call for an immediate end to violence and repression, for the respect for human rights, and for the immediate release of all political prisoners in Myanmar. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights enshrines the principles of equality before the law, the presumption of innocence, the right to a fair and public hearing by an independent and impartial tribunal, and all the guarantees necessary for a person's defense. Tomorrow, my guest will be Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Investments, Regional Development and Informatization of the Slovak Republic, Veronika Remasova, along with the President of the UN Habitat Assembly, Martha Delgado, and UN Habitat Executive Director, Mamouna Mohammed Sharif. They will be here to discuss tomorrow's General Assembly high-level meeting on the implementation of the new urban agenda. And finally, I have a bumper crop of payments to the regular budget to announce, with checks coming from our friends in Gaborone, Kingston, and Tashkent. Any guesses about the countries that go with those capitals? Yeah. The first one was Gaborone, so that's Botswana. Yes, we thank Botswana, Jamaica, and Uzbekistan for helping us reach 91 fully paid up nations. And before we get to the spokesperson for the President of the General Assembly, are there any questions for me? Yes.
Farhan, first, a follow-up on your statement on Aung San Suu Kyi's sentencing. The statement doesn't actually address her statement. Does the Secretary General condemn this 5-year sentence?
Well, I think it's clear from the language that I just read out, which I just had received, that he wants all of the political prisoners, and that includes Aung San Suu Kyi, to be released. So that has always been the case. But certainly, we want all countries to abide by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and I pointed out what the principles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights are, and you can see for yourself that these are not principles that you could claim to be applied in this case.
And another follow-up on Myanmar. Can you tell us whether the Special Envoy, Ms. Heiser, is going to trying to go to Myanmar? Has she succeeded? What's the status on that?
Yes, she certainly is trying to do that, and as you know, she's been in touch with a number of other people, including the Cambodian leadership in their capacity in dealing with this issue for ASEAN. But we'll try to get you an update on her work as we can. I don't have any travel at this point to announce.
I had one. My question was actually in the statement from Steph yesterday on the meeting between the Secretary General and President Putin. He talked about a follow-up by the UN Humanitarian Office and the Russian Ministry of Defense. Is that taking place already?
Yes.
If not, when will it take place?
Yes, it is. We've been following up, and following the agreement reached in principle between the Secretary General and the President of the Russian Federation, our Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs is mobilizing a team on behalf of the UN system to coordinate the evacuation of civilians in the Azovstal plant in Mariupol. And the International Committee of the Red Cross is also involved in the coordination efforts. So today, Wednesday, we're having follow-on discussions with the authorities in Moscow and in Kiev to develop the operational framework for the timely evacuation of civilians. Speed is of the essence. What we've been trying to do from OSHA's side is have some of the most experienced staff with expertise in complex operations traveling to Ukraine from around the world to support this effort. And we're also I can't give you precise locations at this point, given the delicacies of the situation, but we are moving staff to some of the area in Ukraine where they can be of assistance. So we're putting people on the ground. We're in talks with the sides. However, having said all that, what we have still is an agreement in principle. What we're trying to do is translate that into an agreement in detail and an agreement on the ground. And ultimately, what we want is to make sure that that a ceasefire would be respected, that would allow us to move people safely. Well, the timing is dependent on the outcome of discussions happening between OCHA and the Ministry of Defense in Moscow on the one side, and between the crisis coordinator and the authorities in Kiev. So we're trying to balance all of those different talks, and on the one hand, we need a few days to prepare for this extremely complex operation, and those efforts are already happening right now. But on the other hand, of course, we're aware of the need to move as fast as we can, while making sure that that if people are being moved, they will be moved safely. Yes, Maggie, and then James.
So just to follow up on that, Farhan, there were reports early this morning that the Azovstal facility was being attacked again by the Russians. So how does that play into all of this? And does it, shake your belief that this will go through?
The test of our belief that this will go through will be in whether we can get the agreements on the ground that we need. We are working on those. We are working cooperatively with both the authorities in Russia and with the authorities in Ukraine. We're doing what we can to move this along as fast as possible. But again, as you just pointed out, there was some military activity, and we want to make sure that is halted in such a way that we can actually bring people to safety. We don't have those conditions on the ground as of this moment.
And just to follow up on that, do you view this as a possible test for whether you can create this humanitarian contact group that the Secretary General mentioned yesterday? Have the Russians responded at all to that particular proposal?
Well, that is something we're also moving ahead on a separate track, but we're hopeful that that movement will proceed now that he has gone to Russia and now that he is also in Ukraine and will be talking to the officials there tomorrow. Yes, James.
So more on this first. In terms of the numbers, you mentioned you brought very experienced people from around the world. Mm-hmm. Are they already there, those people, or are you waiting for them to arrive? How many are we talking about? How many people are we, because it's supposed to be a ICRC-UN joint operation. How many people from the ICRC are going to be involved in this specific operation? And who is, on behalf of the Secretary General, going to lead this operation? Is there someone been put in charge? Is Mr. Griffiths going to Ukraine for this, or is there someone else who's taking charge of this operation?
Well, regarding the numbers, I won't be able to provide that at this stage. Certainly, you're correct that there will be people from the UN involved, as well as people from the International Committee of the Red Cross. There are some people, some of the senior people are already on the ground. Some of them are being moved into place, including our humanitarian coordinator there, Osnat Lubrani, who you've heard from, and so she will be involved in this directly.
So she's in charge, is she?
I think these are detailed arrangements that are being worked out. I'm not pointing to anyone in charge on the ground at this stage, but certainly she is there and helping to coordinate our efforts on the ground in some of these areas. As you know, our crisis coordinator, Amin Awad, is also in touch with the authorities in Kiev, and he is also being involved in this. But we have senior officials in Russia and around the world trying to also work with the coordination with the various officials to see what can be done to get a concrete arrangement put in place as safely and as quickly as possible.
Another Ukraine question, if I may. A new front in this war in terms of energy, with Moscow cutting off gas supplies to Poland and Bulgaria. What is the UN's response to what the EU is calling gas blackmail?
I don't have any comment on the transactions between countries. Certainly, this sort of problem is also, among other things, a further illustration of the need, again, to wean countries away in general from dependence on fossil fuels, and that is one aspect to the situation.
But it could have humanitarian effects. I mean, there's a lot of people in those two countries relying on Russian gas. Is the UN concerned about this development?
Well, as you know, we're concerned overall about the question of food, energy, and finance, all of the effects that the Ukraine crisis is having on those topics. And as you know, the Secretary General has set up a group dealing just with that matter. So they will look into all of the various economic repercussions. But they've been happening in many different ways, through increased food prices in places ranging from the Horn of Africa to the Middle East.
But with respect, this isn't an economic repercussion. It's a deliberate tactic of the Russians who made a deliberate overnight order to stop gas supplies. It's somewhat different from that, I think.
Yes, and ultimately the involved governments will have to see how they will respond to that. But we are looking at the larger issue of all of the various economic impacts. This is a war that is being fought on the ground, but it also has there are also effects of that war in many different avenues, and we're trying to see what can be done to deal with all of the negative outcomes from this conflict. Yes, Dulcie.
It sounds like there are a lot of players within the UN system, as well as the ICRC, that are navigating this plan. So who in the UN is actually leading this plan to open the humanitarian corridor for Mariupol?
I was mentioning a number of officials on the ground who have been in discussions. Like I said, Amin Awad is in touch with the authorities in Kiev. Usnat Labrani is on the ground with our team that's being put in place. You have, of course, the Secretary General talking to the leaders in both Russia, as he did yesterday, and in Ukraine, as he will do tomorrow. So it's happening on many different fronts.
And what is the ostensible plan where these people will be evacuated to?
Those arrangements are being worked out. We'll provide more details once we can do that. Yes, please.
Yeah, please, could you confirm if the Secretary General will be visiting Nigeria next week, Tuesday and Wednesday? That's on the 3rd and 4th of May. If yes, when is he leaving New York for Nigeria?
Well, the Secretary General is in New York right now, and I suspect we won't see him in New York for some time. We will have some further travel by the Secretary General to announce, but I don't have that announcement ready just yet. But by the end of the week, I do expect to have a further announcement to make about travels that he will be making next week. Yes, please.
Thank you, Farhan Abdullah Masih from Al Arabi TV. Farhan, the Yemeni government forces has accused Houthis of violating the truce. It stated 185 violations in just 2 days. Has the United Nations recorded any of these violations on the ground? And in that case, what that mean for the de-escalation process there in Yemen? Thank you.
From the viewpoint of the UN and its special envoy, Hans Grunberg, the truce is largely holding on the ground, and we're very grateful for that, and we're trying to build upon that. There have been some scattered violations. When those happen, we've been taking it up with the respective sides, and that is where we stand on that right now. Abdelhamid.
Thank you, Farhan. My question is about Libya. We haven't heard any update recently. And as far as I know, that the mandate of Ms. Stephanie Williams expires at the end of this month. Has she been extended, or is there a replacement, or what is the situation with the mandate of Stephanie Williams? Thank you.
There's nothing further to say about her work other than that it is ongoing. She continues at her post. If that changes, we'll make an announcement, but we don't have any announcement to make at this point on any other officials in Libya. And Iftikhar, and then back to you, Maggie.
On the situation in general and the standoff between Dbeiba and the other prime minister who was designated by the parliament. Is there any update on that?
You've heard what we have to say on that situation, and our position on Libya has been unchanged in these past weeks. Iftikhar, and then we'll go to Maggie.
Thank you, Farhan. About a couple of months ago,
UN helicopter went down in Democratic Republic of Congo, and a number of peacekeepers were killed. Have the investigators come to any conclusion about the cause of the crash?
No, that investigation is ongoing. There's no results to share with you at this time. Maggie?
Just another follow-up on Yemen. Any progress from Mr. Grunberg on getting the commercial flights, that flight out of Sana'a to Amman?
I have not heard of anything of any progress on that. He is working on that, and we're hopeful to get that going. But I'll check and see whether there's been any progress made. I haven't heard of anything so far.
And on the press conference you said tomorrow in Kyiv, is it just going to be the Secretary General, or are you expecting a joint one?
I think it will be a joint one. We will inform you better with whom that will be, but yes, I do expect it to be a joint one. And with that, Paulina, come on up.
Security Council so that they can agree with my time positions on a particular issue. The main objection for this meeting is to talk about
It's okay. We can start? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. As the Russian aggression against Ukraine has entered its third month, we continue to get reports of shelling of civilian targets, of targeted urban settings, of civilian infrastructure, causing maximum suffering and damage. Millions of refugees have already fled the country, and in even larger numbers are internally displaced, shaking Ukraine and shaking really the whole region. From the images of people executed in Bucha to the remnants of Mariupol's bombarded theater, where hundreds of civilian refugees have perished, or to the mass graves discovered around Kiev, Russia's war of choice has unleashed immense suffering for the civilian population of Ukraine. There are many countries that have rallied support for Ukraine, either through military equipment to help the country defend itself, or through humanitarian aid, or through opening their homes to refugees. But there is also another important aspect of this support, which is of a different nature, and that's the political support for Ukraine in the international arena. Confronted with this unprecedented aggression, accompanied by the Russian machinery of propaganda and lies that aims to distort the reality on the ground, as well as provide a false narrative for this unjustifiable war, we all need to continue to speak out. We all need to continue to tell the truth and continue to mobilize support for collecting and documenting facts on the atrocities committed in Ukraine. Perpetrators of these crimes must be and will be held accountable. We are heartened by the unity of purpose that has emerged with respect to the documentation of war crimes committed in Ukraine. We all agree on the importance of ensuring that anyone responsible for atrocities in Ukraine is held accountable in accordance with the rule of law. And this is also the main purpose of this Arria-Formula meeting organized by Albania and France with the cooperation of Ukraine. This meeting will bring together member states and key actors involved in the documentation of crimes committed in Ukraine to identify how such efforts can be supported and further coordinated as to ensure the effective investigation and prosecution of those responsible for such atrocities and war crimes. I would also like to commend and pay tribute to your work, to the work of independent professional investigative journalism, to your colleagues that are working in Ukraine in very difficult and challenging conditions, sometimes putting their own lives at risk to tell the truth behind this senseless war. And it was the horrible photos and reports that emerged from the towns near Kiev that triggered such global revulsion as first evidence of what amounts to be a widespread and systematic use of violence against the civilian population in Ukraine. It is thus essential that all such crimes are thoroughly documented and are ultimately used in a court of law. This event will seek to mobilize all efforts, including the ICC, the Human Rights Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine, as well as the Group of Friends on Accountability for Ukraine, also United Nations member states through national prosecutions in states with universal jurisdiction over atrocity crimes or jurisdiction over the crime of aggression, as well as civil society. Justice and accountability should prevail for Ukraine and for the Ukrainian people, but also for the international community as a whole, in order to restore confidence in the international law and in multilateralism that have been so severely damaged by Russia's war of choice. Thank you.
Can we ask you a question, please?
In this connection, I want to stress once more the special military operation in the Ukraine and Donbass, which started in February. All the objectives will be definitely carried out to guarantee the security of people in the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic, the Russian Crimea, and all our country. We must understand that our soldiers and officers have prevented a real threat which was hanging over our motherland. With their courage, resoluteness and heroism, they prevented a large-scale conflict which would spread on our territory according to other people's scenario. The forces which have historically contained Russia, in olden times too, you know this very well, such an independent. Why did they do that? Because such an independent, huge country, they don't need such a country. They think that it, just by existing, it presents a threat to them, even though it's not true. They present a threat to the whole world themselves. We remember the plans of the fascists against the Soviet Union to make people who can work, force those people work to be slaves, and those who couldn't work should go to Siberia and die there. That was a historical document. We remember this document. We also remember how Western states at the beginning of the 1990s and 2000s encouraged international terrorists and bandits in North Caucasus, how they speculated on the problems of our past. And of course, those were problems and the injustices in relation to whole nations, whole peoples in the Caucasus, for example. But they didn't do that to improve us, not at all. They did that so that they could move the problems of the past into our today's life, to encourage separatist moods in our country, and finally to split it and to destroy it. That's why they did that. And finally to push us into a corner, into a bear's corner. In the past, many tried to do this against Russia. But they haven't reached their objective, but they didn't reconcile with this failure. They didn't reconcile with the fact that despite their onslaught, we held out. That's why later they began to prepare an economic war against Russia. Step by step, they used any excuses, and sometimes even without any excuses, they implemented new sanction restrictions. And even today's plans to strengthen us economically have failed. In this connection, our country's enemies forced the creation of new geopolitical weapons. They are not really new, but they created a new impulse. They reckoned that Russophobia would do this. For years, they turned Ukraine our neighboring Ukraine into anti-Russia. Let's remind you that Russia was also always sympathetic and acted as a friend and as a comrade, as a brother. It viewed the creation of the independent Ukrainian state. At the time, we expected that this would be a friendly country, that we would develop together and strengthen each other and create the best conditions for our competition and development. And of course, we didn't expect that they would create anti-Russia on that territory. We cannot allow this. And of course, in the end, they caused and pushed Ukraine to have a direct confrontation in our country, like the military attacks on Donbass and Crimea were in their doctrines, and the Ukrainian people were meant as consumables. And many Ukrainian people are now realizing this, such as the Kiev's regime, its desire to have nuclear weapons and the creation of biological labs and the supply of latest weapons to Ukraine. All that confirms that our reaction to all that was timely and correct. Esteemed colleagues, I want to stress once more, our soldiers and officers and the militia of Donbass are carrying out their missions heroically. All the objectives that have been set will be carried out.
As I have emphasized many times, Poland has prepared to diversify its gas supplies and to obtain gas from various sources. And even before the Baltic gas pipeline enters service, we will be able to protect our economy, protect our households and Poles against such a dramatic step by Russia.
I'm now joined by Jan Palukat. He's a journalist and correspondent for German state broadcaster ARD in Warsaw. Jan, we heard the Polish Prime Minister there saying that Poland will cope without Russian gas. Will it?
Well, officially they can, and they have good reasons to say so. Given the fact that the deposits here in Poland are, according to official data, pretty much filled as to 2/3 of its capacity. Given the fact that the heating season is almost over, and given the fact that Poland indeed built alternative routes, they built a terminal for liquid natural gas at the Baltic Sea. They are about to finalize the already mentioned here in the statement Baltic pipeline throughout the Baltic Sea, which could deliver Norwegian gas to Poland starting for October. So putting all these things together, Poland can cope. But of course, LNG gas from overseas and Norwegian gas is much more expensive than Siberian gas. So the real challenge may be even higher inflation numbers, and Poland is already suffering high inflation numbers here.
Now, many other European countries have refused to follow Putin's demands to pay for Russian gas in rubles. What does this step now mean for them? Do they need to worry?
I think really indeed that this is the point here. This seems to me rather a warning signal to other countries than to Poland. There are countries that are much less prepared for this situation. That is Hungary, that is Austria, and that is last not least Germany, which having its deposits rather lowly filled with having much less alternative routes. The Jamal pipeline, which goes through Poland and ends in Germany, is not the main route of Russian gas supply. We still have Nord Stream, we still have routes via Ukraine. If they would cut it all, then we could see shortfalls in gas supply all over Europe, and a real test for European solidarity, since the gas system in the European Union is very much interconnected.
So the Germany's Minister for Economy and Energy, Robert Habeck, promised that Germany will help out Poland, but then German gas reserves at the moment are at a very low point. How realistic is that?
Well, maybe there comes a point when Polish side could help Germany. There could be interesting questions on the table. For instance, the question whether Polish households would be ready to accept lower temperatures in their flat in order to keep German chemical industry running. But very interestingly so, yesterday, German minister here promised to use German national oil reserves in case that the refinery in Schwedt at the border river between Poland and Germany at the Oder would fail. This refinery is using Russian oil at the moment, seems to be the main obstacle towards a full-scale oil embargo. And this is important here, this refinery delivers not only the greater Berlin region, but also parts of Poland with oil products.
Last question, briefly, if you can. How has this latest move by Vladimir Putin to cut off gas supplies to Poland influenced the mood in Poland in the general public?
Well, this was, of course, a huge topic yesterday. Today, we are talking already about what I mentioned, about inflation rates. So I think this step comes as a surprise for this very moment, but not so surprisingly. And Putin hit a client that was already on the run, was already about to go. Because they are prepared for other supplies, Poland already said that they would not prolong the existing gas contracts, which would exceed anyway until the end of the year. So it's a surprise, but not a huge surprise, I would say so.
So very much a political move there as well by
This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.